Yes. Just got
Yes.
back from a few days away, actually. I've been over to
Anywhere
Whitby.
nice?
Yeah, Whitby. I went over Yorkshire way.
Ooh,
And
Dracula country.
I like going to Whitby. We went to Scarborough, where we found completely accidentally Anne Bronte's grave,
Right. Was
which
it
was quite
lost?
eh?
Was it lost?
Well, it was just there. There's no signposts, nothing like that. It was you went into this very old graveyardy area that was attached to a car park, funnily enough.
Right.
And only one of the graves had flowers on, and he kind of went over, and it was this knackered old grave, and then this other new gravestone lying in front of it that told you that it was the grave of Anne Bronte, who and then later discovered that died of the consumption, which was a good old Victorian illness.
Yeah, I think sometimes that was actually used as a euphemism for the clap. Yeah.
Well, she
Um,
was in Scarborough.
yeah. No, I'm devastated to hear that she's dead. I didn't realise.
But yeah, so we spent a lot of time, and we went over the Kate Bush moors, because obviously, it's Kate Bush made them more famous than Bronte sisters did.
Yeah. I
Um,
didn't realise they'd renamed them as the Kate Bush
the Kate
Moors.
Bush moors, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so they were nice and rolling free and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we had a lovely time. We've just been away and sort of like knocking around York and all that kind of stuff. So we've had a good time.
Oh, brilliant. Rested, recuperated, and ready to talk about leather funnels.
Yeah, leather funnels indeed. Okay, so I'm going. We this week, contrary to my dyslexia at the end of last episode, it wasn't the leather funeral. It was the leather funnel
Yes.
that we were reading. So here's the synopsis. The basic idea is this English gentleman who went to see a friend of his called Lionel. Surname we think is Decree, depending on which audio version you listen to. So Lionel Decree, who's very much into his paranormal stuff. He seems to be into his paranormal paraphernalia and has a house full of collectibles. And he goes to stay with him, and his friend shows him this leather funnel that has etchings on it and curiously rough markings round the small end. And then he sort of says, well, why is this curious? And then they go into this whole kind of theory about how you can attach to the spiritualness of any object by sleeping next to it. And then you will dream what actually went on with that particular item. And so he challenges his friend. So Lionel challenges him, the narrator, to sleep with the funnel and see if anything comes up in his dreams. And he dreams of this woman who is tied down to an old wooden horse and is being tortured. And part of her torture is using this funnel. But before you know where the funnel is being thrust, he wakes himself up. 3 buckets of water get carried in, and he just and the funnel is thrust, and that's when he forces himself to wake up because he cannot take any more of the grisly torture. He then screams so loud that he wakes the entire house up, and Lionel comes down to see him. And so Lionel then gets out this book and says, right, you had this dream, same to the dream that I had, but I, being harder than you, stayed asleep a bit longer. But this is what I found. And he comes up with this whole historical story of this woman who was the poisoner of her husband and brothers. And in order to get her to admit who she did all these poisonings and killings with, they tortured her by using this funnel, which we later find is inserted in the mouth, and all the water is poured in. So it's basically waterboarding using a funnel until she admits. And it's a very grisly historical account that the pair of them both dreamt about by being next to this funnel. And then the funnel itself has the woman's name actually written on it. They can actually make out the markings now that they have this knowledge. And then the strange markings around the small end, instead of it being a rough knife to cut, they worked out it was actually her teeth as she bit down on the funnel to try and stop the torture. Was that the one you read?
That was near as damn it is to swearing. Yes. Yes, it was. Yeah.
So, what did you think of it?
I absolutely loved it. I think Arthur Conan Doyle knows how to write, or knew how to write. Is it still the past tense? If he's anyway, Arthur Conan Doyle, yeah, is very, very readable. And picking it up was like picking up something that was a Sherlock Holmes story, but maybe a little bit more supernatural. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, I wonder if he'd actually considered making Lionel into a series character, the way he'd made Sherlock Holmes into a series character, with Lionel sort of like being, because he's such an expert on the paranormal, the same way Holmes is an expert on crime. I was wondering if he'd thought of making this character into a repeating expert on the paranormal who was faced with this issue and that issue and managed to solve them with his superior knowledge.
I'm going to agree with you completely and utterly on thinking it was absolutely brilliant. I'd like to first of all state what you just said there. Actually, I hadn't considered as much. However, I'd like to say I had never read this story before. Okay, this one was not one that turned up in one of my books and didn't know who wrote it. But what you just described there is actually a character that I've created called Elizabeth Stead along those lines. It's a Sherlock Holmes type character, but one that investigates the paranormal.
So what you're saying here is Arthur Conan Doyle stole this idea off you.
He's obviously a time traveler
Yeah.
come forward in time, thought actually he's onto something there, gone back and written this. No, it's what I mean to say is that I think the leap into having a Sherlock Holmes style paranormal detective is a natural one that I think is more surprising at the fact that it didn't exist more than this finding this one little gem. And how did it not become a series in that kind of thing? If someone like me who hasn't read this story but has read Sherlock Holmes could think, oh, you can have a Sherlock Holmes style one. How many people could have had that idea? Because it's, it doesn't seem to be a very hard idea to have that as a character. And the way that he's written this is really, really fantastic. I thought in the way that he did it. I love the moment. There's a couple of moments in it that were just superb. One of them was when he went, well, what did you dream? And he's just about to tell him when he goes, hang on, no, I can use this as an experiment. I'm not going to tell you. You're going to sit down and sleep. Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. Absolutely magnificent.
So, yeah, we've got sort of like the logical approach of a Sherlock Holmes character, but dipping their toes into the paranormal, which to me, it seems more Conan Doyle than I would have expected, because the more you learn about Conan Doyle with his involvement in mediums and spiritualism, the more difficult it is to believe that he's the man who gave us the most logical character that ever existed.
But he actually has one of the most beautiful pieces of logic in this that doesn't sound like logic at all. I kind of, please excuse this, is paraphrasing. But at some point, the unnamed narrator refers to people that talk about the science of dreams as being charlatans, to which Lionel responds that basically today's charlatans are tomorrow's scientists.
And yeah, I mean, this was written roughly around the time that Freud was talking about the interpretation of dreams. And yeah, it was sort of like a breakthrough in psychological approaches to things.
It was incredibly full of that kind of insightfulness. Even the lying down and sleeping with the objects and dreaming about the objects, actually, because it's not a ghostly thing. This isn't communicating with the dead as you'd expect from an Arthur Conan Doyle as well, to be honest.
Yeah,
because he was very much into, like, he believed that paper fairies were real. He believed that parlor tricks were real. He was friends with Houdini, and Houdini was into debunking parlor psychics, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was into trying to prove parlor psychics and ghosts. But here he uses way, way, way before anyone's even mentioned it, the stone tape theory, that the object itself, something happens that is so violent that the energies of the action record themselves upon the object. And that by using dreams, by sleeping next to it, you're trying to tune in, almost like tuning in a radio, to hear those frequencies. And that is an actual paranormal theory that really came to prominence in the 70s, where there was a fictional TV series called The Stone Tapes. And it's also the theory that's been presented why you see Roman soldiers in York, for example, and why they're actually in the ground, because their road would have been a foot below where the ground is now. That's why, and that's why ghosts walk through walls. You're only watching a reenactment rather than contacting the dead. And here he is, in, was it 1903? I think this story was
right.
Talking about that very same concept.
Which, yeah, it's lovely, really, and I don't want to mock Arthur Conan Doyle for his beliefs in spiritualism, which has been sort of like Houdini sort of like disproved most of what Conan Doyle believed in whilst Conan Doyle was believing it, which seemed a little bit cruel, in fairness, because, yeah, sometimes all we've got is our personal beliefs. But also, even now in the 21st century, there are things that we believe in where people will go, what the fuck were you thinking? I don't know whether it's just like whether they look at me and my belief that if I press the button on the remote control harder, it's going to work even if the batteries are failing. But yeah.
I think the thing with Houdini, I think it's a slightly different idea. I think when you have intellectual discussion, you can have different ideas, and you don't need to completely come around to the other person's idea. I think this is where we are a bit lost at the moment in the modern world of critical thinking, in that I think, and the best thing that I ever saw sum it up was Twitter, the internet in 2010, was I like apples, I like oranges. Oh, look at that, we like different things. Where nowadays it's I like apples, I like oranges. Why do you hate apples?
Yeah.
Right. And I think back then, I don't think Conan Doyle's faith in what he believed was actually disturbed by what Houdini was doing. What you actually had was a very good discussion that took both sides of the argument, when actually it benefits the argument for neither side to be swayed by the other. So you always have this very healthy discussion going on in the center. And that's why I say I think that's where we've missed a bit now. If somebody wants to sit there and try and convince me that God exists, and I want to sit there and tell them that God doesn't, it shouldn't end in a row between us. It should actually end up with us just agreeing to disagree, but having a great discussion in the middle that goes on with the various different forms of evidence and non-evidence, and faith and belief, as an actual sort of like intelligent discussion. Whereas nowadays that's just not on. I mean, I will hold my hand up, full flag on the mast. I am an atheist, but I don't see it as my duty to go around and try and stop other people believing, where I know atheists that do. And I think that's completely wrong, but have a discussion about it by all means.
Yeah, with this one, do we think that this was a very sexual story?
Did I think it was a very sexual story?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, well, that was another interesting discussion.
No. I thought, I had to think about it, you see. It's just the poison of the question. I don't know how much of because seriously, how much it says about me that when he woke up from the dream before we actually knew where the funnel had been placed, how much of that was actually Sir Arthur Conan Doyle being suggestive, or how much of that was just my modern brain seeing everything as being dirty?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the reason why I'm thinking that there are certain suggestively sexual elements there. You've got the man who, oh, well, let's have an experiment. Why don't you sleep on my couch? Yeah, fallen for that before, and it's not going to happen, mate. So yeah, and why don't you sort of like take this leather funnel to bed with you? Which that sounds like one of the cheesiest come-on lines ever. Thank you for the leather funnel. What am I going to do with this? Well, you sleep with that, and you're going to have some really good dreams. Right. Thanks for and then he sort of like dreams about it being inserted into a woman, which again,
who is tied to a wooden horse, whose hands are bound, and she's bound. Yeah, you can see a lot of
you can see that on Pornhub.
Yeah, I think it, like I say, is it was it written in a suggestive way, or is it just modern world? You know, with that whole classic case of the entendre, isn't it? Is it the way that we are reading it, or is it how it was written?
I think it's almost certainly how we're reading it. It's hard to think of Arthur Conan Doyle saying anything that's sort of like untoward. I mean, when you look at the way he wrote about Sherlock Holmes and yeah, where it's he always thinks of her as the woman, or
Yeah, I
refers
mean,
to
they did ejaculate a lot in.
an awful lot.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, that's it's a wonder they have any energy to actually solve the bloody crime.
I don't know. I think it. Yeah, was it a sexual story? No. Do I think it was a sexual story? No. Could it be reading as one? Yeah, definitely. I think there was a lot of kind of stuff that was almost, if you were writing that today, and we've discussed this with some of the other stories, it didn't read like a modern story does.
No, he didn't.
It definitely read of its time in the way that it was constructed and the way that it was put together. I thought again it was using that because one of the things we've noticed of that kind of Victorian Edwardian period is a lot of these tales are told by proxy. So you're kind of sitting there going, "It didn't happen to me; it happened to somebody else," you know. And so this is a tale that was told to me that I'm now telling you. And in this one, he's now actually created the object in between. So the narrator's had the experience of having the dream, but the sordid frightfulness that has happened, the horror itself, happened many hundreds of years ago to somebody else. The horror itself is never really truly happening to the person that's the protagonist.
Again, I'm still veering towards it being quite sexual, though. And even your choice of phrasing there, the sordid frightfulness. I mean, that's the sort of thing that they would sort of like use in, yeah, League of Gentlemen to refer to, yeah, sexual knowledge of one another. You know, sort of like, oh, we've just been involved in some sordid frightfulness, um, which I need to write that as part of a story. That is.
I can't remember where I got the line from. It's not my line. So I don't want anyone coming up. If you know who it's from, sordid frightfulness, please put it in the comments. Because I can't remember where I got it from, but I know I didn't create it.
But yeah, no, I think it's got those strengths going for it. Him as a series character, I could definitely relate to that. But also this whole notion that things are imprinted with memories and you can pick up on them. This, to me, whilst it sounds like a fantastic trope to have in horror fiction or something in the supernatural, it also sounds like the laziest idea for a schoolboy who is thinking, do you know what? Here's the book I'm meant to have read, can't be asked, stick it under the pillow, and yeah, I'll sleep on it and it will all by osmosis go into my head.
Well, I'm gonna say is I know it sounds like you say it is a trope. Is it the lazy? That's the whole recording, isn't it?
Yeah.
And audio books. Go to sleep listening to an audio book and wake up a genius. I think the Simpsons did that one, where Homer Simpson did it. So they then played the tape in reverse, and he came out even more stupid.
Right.
But the whole that possessed item. I mean, J.K. Rowling used that with Tom Riddle's diary and the whole Horcrux thing. It's a similar idea. It told in a different way.
When she was doing it.
Eh?
Was Ginny asleep when she was fettling with his diary?
Well, it was writing into it, wasn't it? And then it was coming back, and then they go into a dream state. Harry Potter went into a dream state to see where the diary came from because the diary took over his thoughts in that kind of way. It was a possessing item. Now, remember, this is an early time. What was it we were reading? Oh, no, it wasn't. It wasn't what we were reading. It was, we happened to be brushing upon the idea of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, where the concept being that dreams are just another universe that you go and visit, rather than being that kind of thing. So the idea of dreams being conduits to other knowledges is something that's going around, and I think it's not so lazy. I think the idea of the lazy schoolboy, I'll just put the book under, and absorb it. But I think the idea of a spirit being within something, I think it's a great idea. I don't know when that goes back to. I think that's worth looking at as an item idea. I'm trying to think of it now, where an item is what, because you had the monkey's paw, but you had to do an actual wish with that. But it'd be things like an evil pen, probably. And, if you want to be that was an idea I had for a story, and I couldn't quite make it work. We had a vampire pen, is what we originally called it. So as you wrote with it, it took the blood out of your finger as you wrote. So you could only ever write in blood, but everything you wrote would end up being a bestseller because it was a Faustian deal done with this pen.
Cool.
So the using of the objects. It's kind of interesting because I disagree that it's a lazy trope, but I like the idea of it being a lazy schoolboy who thinks he can just put a book under his pillow, you know, and then sort of like learn it by osmosis. I don't know how much of that is autobiographical to you for that idea, but
I'm just quickly glancing at that. So I mean, in Beowulf, there's his armor and his sword, which is sort of like have got special meaning because they've been handed down to him and they're meant to have sort of like superior special powers. Is that the sort of thing that you're meaning when you sort of like saying how far back does this?
Yeah, I mean, really, that you could say that, couldn't you? That it's embedded with the memories of ancestor. So, you know, that's the similar kind of idea that it's talking about, isn't it? So it's not just an item, it's an item with experience. And it's the experience that you're locking into. And it could be that in something like Beowulf, for example. I bet there's probably something in the Tale of Gilgamesh as well, actually, isn't there? Where it's the item itself has its own history and its own experience that gives you extra because you know you are now taking on that experience, and it's a similar idea to that in that this item has its own experiences, and by sitting next to it you are learning its experiences, that you know, and the items that it the things that it has seen and done.
Is there a danger that this fetishizing of objects is almost promoting the idea of capitalism as though capitalism is something good that we all aspire to? Let's collect all the objects. The objects sort of like sustain our dreams. The objects are sort of like our connection to the past. The objects are the important thing. And it's almost as though the leather funnel isn't as important as the woman who was murdered by executioners who had actually murdered other people. The important thing within the story is the leather funnel. And yeah, the people from the past are remembered through it, but forgotten by the end of it.
In a way, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is before we get into that version of capitalism that came after World War II, where it became you had to have things that would break. So prior to this, when you had something like this, you had a 400-year-old funnel because they don't make them like they used to, right?
Yeah.
Make a funnel nowadays, it's not going to last 400 years. That's that's what happened post World War II.
I buy my funnels in Poundland, and I've still not got any in the household, and I think I've got about maybe a dozen. But yeah, they just disappear. Yeah.
Half the time, I kind of just, if I need a funnel, half the time I'm trying to like pour without one and just aim it correctly. And if it's anything like powdered based stuff, I just use paper and roll it up. So it's like I say, it's very consumable. That was it. Consumable items was this whole kind of post World War II idea to get economies going, is to make things not last as long so that people have to continuously buy things. So it kind of it predates that in a way, but still has, I think you're right, it has this accumulative capitalist idea about it, much in the same way as you were describing. I was thinking, yeah, of course, that's a Picasso, isn't it? That's a Van Gogh. That's, you know, it's worth nothing when the artist was alive and you bought it and it was just a kind of, oh yes, it's a very yellow painting of a bad painting of a chair. Yeah. But then the artist dies and 100 years goes past and he has some interesting stories because he cut his ear off and he was a bit of a nut job. And suddenly the story of the artist adds value to the painting. The painting hasn't changed. It hasn't become a better painting. It hasn't become any more important over that, but it now has this history. It now has its own story, which adds this value to it, which is a very capitalist idea. So I think you're onto something there. That is, the funnel itself is just a leather funnel, but the story behind it that he now dreams about adds this value. to the actual funnel itself. So it now becomes collectible within Lionel's collection. It's something that's now a desirable object for him to have because it has this history, rather than a 400-year-old, piece of tat, that doesn't have any history about it anymore.
What do we think they're scared of?
Oh, that's a good question. I genuinely think that a lot of the idea of nostalgia, and funny enough, because I've been writing a lot, as you know, I've been writing a lot recently about The Door in the Wall with H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
Which I think taps onto the same concept as that. I think the idea of nostalgia and history and being very retro, he said, with a huge amount of toys sat behind him, is being frightened of aging. I think some of it, and being forgotten, and forgetting things like childhood, and forgetting things like the past, and just and it's a very kind of, I think, a more modern phenomenon. I think this is the Victorian times. I know, for example, it was about 1885 when the Parliament actually had to pass an act to stop the Victorians ripping down old buildings, so that we actually had some monuments left. And it was about 1845 when the Historical Society started up, that, funnily enough, saved most of the Christmas songs that we've got now, because they were so worried that a lot of the old stories and old songs were just going to disappear. So these were these kind of like, so I think from a literary point of view, when you're an artist, when you're someone who's into creativity and being very creative, it's not always about forward thinking. You need something to look back on. So I think some of this is that fear of loss of history, of loss of stories.
I'm going to slightly disagree with you there, or maybe I'm agreeing with you, but I've not thought it right through to the proper conclusion. But I think what we're actually witnessing in this story is the reaction to a Victorian horror show, or a Victorian freak show.
Okay.
So if you think about people like the Elephant Man, and it was the Elephant Man, wasn't it? He's not some superhero that I've just imagined. Who?
No, he was a human being.
Yes, he was not an animal, as John Hurt said. So if you have a period which was just before this, where people were going to see these Victorian freak shows and were taking pleasure and entertainment from the misery and suffering of others, which we pretend that we don't do that nowadays, yet you want to see me happy, stick me with YouTube and Parkour fails, and I'm sort of like grinning for an hour as I watch people.
It's the new Bedlam, isn't it?
Yeah. But what we've got there is exactly the same thing. We've got sort of like somebody laying down to sleep, being entertained by the dream, and the dream is a graphic horror story. It's a graphic, upsetting horror story, and he doesn't get to the end of it. Whereas Lionel is, well, look at me, yeah. I'm going to sort of like come here with the big dick energy and say, yeah, I watched the whole thing all the way through. And yeah, it is as though they've been sort of like seeing who could tolerate watching the freak show for longest.
Yeah, so I mean that's very competitiveness, isn't it? Lionel's motivations are almost competitive.
Yeah,
at that point.
And Lionel's an unbeatable opponent because he's got sort of like the Sherlock Holmes knowledge of the supernatural,
which is what Sherlock Holmes does a lot as well. Sherlock Holmes does a lot of stuff from a competitive nature.
Yeah,
he's a lot of the time when he's actually doing his, it's not deductions, is it? It's something else that he uses. But when he's doing a lot of his recounting of it, he's doing it to belittle the people around him rather than share the knowledge. He's actually doing it to show how much better he is rather than bring them in on it.
He's slapping them across the face with the knowledge. Yeah. So I think the characters are very much Arthur Conan Doyle characters.
Yes.
Which again is good. The writing style is Conan Doyle's wonderful, approachable way of getting into these things.
Yes.
And it's just there's these Victorian aspects of, come and look at the freak show, and you go and look at the freak show, and this is saying freak show in its historical term. This isn't me suggesting that anybody should be.
No, I'm going to agree with it because, like you say, it still goes on today. we see movements on what we find as entertaining, and they always end up in this kind of macabre sense. At the moment, we've been through stage psychics, you know,
Yeah.
with all trying to get in contact with Auntie May, who hasn't died yet, but you got the wrong idea of which picture you were supposed to bring with you, you know, all that kind of stuff. And that's now moved on to stage psychologists who are
Yeah.
doing tours talking about notorious serial killers. And I mean, that's what you touched on with Conversations with Dead Serial Killers, is this idea of glamorizing the macabre as a way of showing intelligence. It's not just about, oh, I'm interested in this because, you know, Jeffrey Dahmer kept heads in a fridge. It's kind of like, well, how did you catch the man who kept heads in his fridge? You know, and it's because we actually had to take those heads out of a fridge and look at them and work out what kind of a man kept a head in the fridge. And that is where the macabre fascination currently lies. We're back in the Victorian
It is in the people wondering, oh, how did you capture him? How and trying to intellectualize it, or do you think a lot of that is, oh, tell me more about these heads in fridges and let me find some way of sort of like prettying it up and making it sound as though I've got an intellectual interest in this, rather than I'm just sort of like a ghoul that wants to find out more about heads in fridges?
I think there's a lot of lying to yourself involved in this. I think people go to these things intellectualizing it, where actually they're going purely because of the macabreness of it. Because if you had someone who sat there and go, this is how we catch a burglar, which is, you know, a similar profiling idea,
Yeah.
you know, you wouldn't fill the Grand Theatre with that. But you
No.
would fill the Grand Theatre with someone who said, this is how we caught the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yeah.
It's the Yorkshire Ripper, that's the draw, not the psychology.
I used to watch Big Brother when it was first out. I can't remember whether it's still on or not. But at first, everybody said, oh, this is a social experiment about how people are going to cope. And you watch the first season thinking, oh, this is a social experiment. And then you start watching it thinking, are they going to fuck whilst the cameras are on them?
Yeah.
Are they going to fight? Is somebody going to get stabbed whilst they're in there? Who's going to have the biggest argument and bollock someone? And is it going to be over something really, really, really fucking petty? And yeah, you don't watch it thinking this is a social experiment. You watch it thinking, oh, this is going to be entertaining because they're going to sort of like split the narrative into fighting and fucking. And yeah, let's watch them throw beer down the necks of these poor, sad bastards that are on this show. Yeah, and again, it's the whole Victorian freak show.
Yes, very much. Like I say, it all goes back to Bedlam in that way. I thought that with the early days of things like Britain's Got Talent, because they did change at one point, but they used to put a lot of people on that were just really terrible. And
Yeah,
it wasn't the person's fault. I've actually auditioned for Britain's Got Talent.
right.
So from behind the scenes, you go through 4 auditions before you even get onto the stage. And at no point are they telling you that you're rubbish. Oh, that's great. We're going to put you through we're going to let you see the producer. Oh, that's great. You're going to go and see the producer. So by the time they get on stage, they've been told they're great. And they're not. And they get on stage and they're really rubbish. And then they get ripped to shreds because that's what the TV part of it is. And this person on stage is really upset because they've been ripped to shreds. And I go, well, what do you know? Because I've actually had 4 other people, including the producer, tell me I'm great. Who are you to tell me I'm rubbish? And suddenly you got that conflict. It's completely manufactured. But that's why people used to watch the show. They watched it for the bad ones, not the good ones.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, as soon as Susan Boyle started singing, and sort of like she goes from being ugly munter to somebody who can sing very, very well.
Yeah.
It's just a case of, oh, I was expecting her to be as crap at singing as she is appearing physically, because I'm shallow and I judge people on their appearance.
It happens all the time. They had some ballroom dancers. They had like this 80-year-old ballroom dancer who gets standing ovations. She doesn't get standing ovation because of her ballroom dancing. She gets standing ovation because she's 80.
Yeah.
Doing it. And you get the kids going on, and they're very talented. And this is the problem: is sometimes you look at it and go, "Yeah, there's a lot of talent going on," but are they being judged on the talent, or are they being judged for the freak showness
Yeah.
of it. Oh my God, we didn't expect this 8-year-old to be able to do all these funny voices. We didn't expect this guy in a wheelchair to be funny
Yeah.
and be able to tell jokes. We didn't expect, Steve Royal to actually be able to hold down a job. It's that kind of, love you, Steve. It's the unexpected that people go. There's always this macabre thing, and I think you're right in the way that this story is. It's that same sort of, it's the macabre collection. I want to go to the one that's in London that you can't go in unless you're invited in, which is the one that the Metropolitan Police have, which is all the murder weapons and.
All right.
Yeah, the Dark Museum. It's goes back, goes all the way back to Victorian times. They have all these things, these actual murder weapons and stuff like that, and it's a museum that only if you're learning to be a detective you get to go in and see. And occasionally, so either that or be very famous and go, I'm writing a book about this, I'm really famous, and then everybody wants to sort of like rub shoulders with someone who's really famous, so they let you into these places.
Right. Clearly, I've got to sort of like suck somebody's dick to get into there. Then
I've been trying to find it. I've been trying to find it for years. It might change now that we actually have a male head of the Metropolitan Police. You might be able to actually do sexual favours now to get in, according to their WhatsApp messages.
That would be an irony that they've taken a dick out and now there is one. No, I'm not even going to do that. That's So long story short, then really, really enjoyed this one. It was an awful lot of fun.
Brilliant, with some really, really good, strong ideas as well behind it, and it wasn't so condescending as sometimes these kind of stories can be. I thought it was really, really well balanced, and I love the fact that again he did. You're right about the Sherlock Holmes sort of things. You were reading it from a Watson type character's point of view. The narrator was you with your level of understanding, talking to someone who had a greater understanding, and so that was very Arthur Conan Doyle thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely loved it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Right, so Ash, what are we reading next?
Right, I was looking at something by Tolstoy, but then I realised I'm not sure how to pronounce this. Which and also there seem to be two versions of the Tolstoy one floating around. So to give me time to work out which one, I thought we would go with ABO by Walter Delamere.
Well, hang on a second. AB. Remember, I'm a dyslexic. I need to work out how to spell that.
A
B O.
Yep.
By Walter
Delamere.
Right. Okay.
I've got no idea what the hell the story is.
Wonderful. I got no. Have you actually searched it? Does this already have an audiobook version? Or
there is an audiobook version? Yeah, I think there might actually be two.
Right. Okay, that's fantastic. Just send me a link to that, will you, so I can get it up on the reading list. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. Walter Delamere. The name sounds really familiar. ABO doesn't sound familiar at all, but Walter Delamere does.
Yes. He's well, can't remember off the top of my head what he's famous for, but he has done quite a few famous stories.
Right, okay.
Let's see. Hold on a second. I'm just sending you the link now. Did he write Ivanhoe?
Don't know. I'll have to look him up.
Um,
it's not something that's springing to the forefront of my mind.
English poet, the Poetry Foundation. No, he didn't write it. He's famous for not writing Ivanhoe, even though I was expecting him to. He didn't, and yes.
Every time at the pub quiz they ask who wrote Ivanhoe, I always write Walter Delamere and always get it wrong. So
yeah,
that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I look forward to that because I like it. I like it when I don't know them.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it as well. Thank you for that. Really, really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. And hopefully we might have Sean back next week. He's very, very busy. So we'll see what's going. And also, we do need to invite Ramsey back, I think.
Yes.
I haven't spoken to Ramsey for ages, so we need to speak to him again.
Definitely.
Right. Well, Have a good week, Ash.
You too, mate. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.